Carol Breckenridge and Arjun Appadurai set up PUKAR some 12 years ago. They founded it and then they built it, selecting and nurturing the associates, many of them still there, developing the programs, and I think right up to the time that Carol died in 2009, she was very much in the thick of the PUKAR thinking. She was sitting in New York, but somewhere her heart was still here, and many regarded her as the sort of soul, as the Atma of PUKAR. Carol's and Arjun's commitment to work for the poor, for the underprivileged, for the marginalized of this city is, I think, quite well known. Some of the projects have done some remarkable work. The project in Kola Bandar, the Youth Fellowship Program, the development of barefoot researchers, all this was really because the late Carol Breckenridge and Arjun wanted to focus on this city's underprivileged. So I think what better way to salute her, to honor her memory, than to have here to speak to us today Professor Abhijit Banerjee. I think, again, most of you know about him and his path-breaking book, Poor Economics. When we were, yes, you can please give him a good hand. I'd like to join me in that. I must tell you that when we were planning this event, the trustees of PUKAR were unanimous in their choice of speaker, if only they could get him. And I have to share with you a confession that I was one of the pessimists. I thought somebody as an academic and an author as hot, as they say in youth parlance, as Abhijit Banerjee, will we really get him? But I didn't. I think perhaps I underestimated the prowess of PUKAR's director, Anita Patil Deshmukh, who is a very intrepid and tenacious lady. And so here we have him amongst us today. Thank you, Anita, and thank you very much, Abhijit. PUKAR is delighted to welcome you, Professor. And I want to say that Arjun Appadurai would have been here to do it himself. I have no business to be here, other than the fact that I also have a beard, and they say that all bearded men are wise. But otherwise, I have no credentials to be standing up here. Arjun would have been here himself, but he had a commitment that he had made much, much prior to the fixing of the date today. But Arjun is represented here in more than spirit by his wife, Gabi Bochkai. Have I got the pronunciation right? And her mother, Mara Bochkai. So Arjun is well represented. Abhijit Banerjee will speak to you today on why children in India aren't really learning much at school, which you might think is very timely because today's newspapers carry an alarming report about the falling standards of education in India 2 years after the Right to Education Act was passed. Those of you who've read this amazing book by Abhijit Banerjee and his co-author Esther Duflo would know that they have done some really seminal, some pioneering work through their Poverty Action Lab, which is a network of professors in a number of offices across the world. And while everybody has a point of view on poverty, uh, and everybody's agreed that poverty is a bad thing and we must do something to alleviate it, I think there are many views on what should be done and what works and what doesn't. And I think Abhijit Banerjee has brought to bear on this subject a rigor, a scientific rigor that has been missing. There have been many assumptions, there have been many lazy generalizations, and many of them have carried all kinds of ideological burdens, which Professor Banerjee does not have. And therefore, I think the insights that this book and his work, the insights that they bring on poverty are very important for not just policymakers, for social activists, for people on the ground, but I think for anybody who is interested, seriously concerned about poverty. So I think we need to hear him very carefully today, and after he speaks, which will be for about 50 minutes immediately after I get off the podium, there will be about a 30-minute question-answer session.
It's a great honor for me to be invited to give the Calibrating With lecture. This is both her work and both her academic work and the work embodied in PUKAR inspires many of us who work in this field, and it's a genuine privilege to be asked to speak in her name. I hope what I have to say, I don't know that she would have agreed with what I have to say, but I hope it's not disrespectful. So what I have to talk about today, as you just said, is very topical because it's, yesterday I was at the release of ASAR, which is the Annual Survey of Education report, and if you read the newspapers or watched TV, it was uniformly bad news, I would say. So I'll come to the bad news in a minute, but it's perhaps a reasonable time to start asking this question. So next, let's have the whole slide. This is for me to conclude. So the first fact to be put on the table is the good news. I think the good news is important, and it's important because it's easy to be blasé. I think 20 years ago, it was commonplace to assume that the big problem of education is children are not going to school. And the running theory was that parents really don't want children to go to school because there is labor to be done. And that was kind of the accepted theory that was going. And then, as it often happens, the world surprised us. So between basically the mid-90s and now, there's been an enormous expansion in education participation. In India now, the primary school enrollment rates are over 96%. That even in the 11 to 14 age range, in most states, over 90% go to school. So this is, in other words, the problem that people had assumed was the key problem somehow solved itself. And that's not just true in India, it's true the worldwide. If you show the next figure, it's going to show that. So this is a picture in 2005. It's even the curves that are catching up are the curves in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and they continue to catch up over the last 5 years or 7 years. So you see more and more convergence. So basically all over the poorer parts of the world, where children were out of school till the mid-90s, there's a lot of convergence towards the rest of the world. So most places, most people are going to school. So that's the good news. And I don't think there's any gainsaying the good news. because of what I'll say in a minute. I think this is important. It's certainly, you can't learn without going to school. I think that we know. Whether we can, the interesting question is, can you learn if you go to school? Come to the next. So these are the results. Just go to the next one. I'm just going to show you. This is from yesterday. I'll come back to it. Let's go to the, yeah. So this is ASAR results from yesterday. This is basically a survey of 600,000 children all over India. It's a representative sample of every district in India. It's not just, which is a remarkable act of social activism by itself, to just get to those many places, get people tested. This is all volunteer. The whole thing is carried out by volunteers. And the basic fact to notice is if you look at those nice violet bars, the violet bars were kind of steady at 50%, I'll say what that means in a minute, and then seem to have been going down over the last 2 years. Say something about word going down, but the most of what I want to say is just about the levels. The levels are, what's the question? The question is, what is the fraction of children in 5th grade who can read at 2nd grade level? That's the question. So, whether it's going up or down, the most important fact is that it's around 50%. 50% of children in class 5 can read at 2nd grade level, the rest cannot. That's by far, you know, the trends, maybe things go up and down, but the core fact is kind of stunning. The other fact to also keep in mind, and I'll say something more about it in a bit, is that if you look at that difference between the government schools and the private schools, it's there. But the first order fact is that the private schools, 60% of the children in 5th grade can read at 2nd grade level, but 40% cannot. So I think the big fact is that neither private nor public schools are delivering anything like what we would think would be a reasonable education. I think that's sort of core fact number one, and it's worth keeping in mind. Same fact, interestingly, it's not something that is uniquely Indian. Pakistan has the same problem. There's a similar survey in Pakistan, finds the same thing. Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania have a similar survey. They find worse results. Mali, Senegal, and Ghana have similar surveys, and they find also worse results than India. So this is not, it's a worldwide problem. I'm sure if you go to other countries, you'll find the same problem. Many other countries will find the same problem. So that's a sort of a given, and so it's a useful thing to keep in mind. It's not an Indian problem. So we need to look for the source of the problem somewhere beyond just somehow the, you know, the incompetence of some of our unique incompetence as a nation. So it's something else that's going on. Okay, next slide. So this is just to put it in the just 1 second in the context of this is the same question. Class 5. How many children can read at 2nd grade level in Hindi? Numbers 50% in Delhi government schools, in municipal corporation school 43%, in private schools Delhi much higher, but private schools in Delhi is a very different ballgame. Delhi is a very rich city, and lots of private schools in Delhi are fairly privileged places. So, but if you leave that out, it's these numbers are very similar to the rest of the country. I bring this up because I realize PUKAR works mostly in urban Bombay. We don't have the numbers for urban Bombay. I've looked at the numbers for urban Hyderabad, which look worse than Delhi, and for urban Patna, which look better than Delhi. I can't tell you why, but I'll tell you that there's, so I don't know where Mumbai stands in that space, but you know, Delhi is a reasonable benchmark. Next slide. So what's the problem? Then there are many different readings of the problem. Many people have different views. So let's go back. I'm going to basically talk about 5 different, I think, theories of what the problem is, and depending on who you ask. So, the Minister of Education, Human Resource Development, Mr. Dr. Pallam Raju, yesterday talked almost exclusively about the first one, that he is keen that the school should have good buildings and other forms of infrastructure inputs. There's a strong view that we need to hire teachers, more teachers, and pay them more. I should say, in the outside, India, if you look at countries which pay teachers, how much people countries pay government teachers relative to per capita income, India is one of the highest. India pays its teachers more relative to per capita income than almost any country in the world. We are very generous to our teachers. I mean, that's not to say that maybe they're still worth more, but they're not paid by global standards, they're well paid. Third possibility is that there's something wrong with the teaching. I'll spend a lot of time talking about that. I'm going to say something about demand. There's always a view, especially among people like me who are coming from the economics fraternity, who say that, look, the problem is that you're teaching these people and they don't want to learn. For whatever reason. You can then have your own theory of that. I'll talk about that. And finally, I talk about something called distorted beliefs. And I'll come back to what that means. Okay. So I'll say a little bit, let's stop. A little bit about what I mean by evidence. So what we do in Poverty Action Lab is we run large-scale field experiments. So what we do in particular is if you want to test whether a particular, let's say, doubling the teacher-student ratio, does it work or not? How do you tell? Well, you compare schools which have more teachers per child with schools which have less teachers per child, you pick up many things. Because typically, privileged schools have more teachers per child, but their parents are also privileged, and all kinds of things. So you conflate a lot of things. To separate that, what a lot of these what are called randomized control trials, RCTs, do is they randomly assign an increase in the number of teachers to some schools and not to others. They randomly do that, meaning they choose the schools that get them by lottery, and as a result, the comparison between them is unbiased. There's no reason, there's no systematic difference between them. So what you find after you do that is the net effect of what you intervene. So that's the reason why I'm going to emphasize a lot of these randomized control trials. There's lots of them in India now, and so there's enough, I think, a body of evidence which is relatively, I think, solid on this point. So I'll speak a lot about those, but I'll mention, I just wanted to emphasize that the evidence, I think, I'm going to talk about is relatively high quality, and I don't think the evidence is the problem. So the first and I think most striking, maybe not, this is not striking, but it's certainly one of the most striking things is that there was a whole bunch of these randomized control trials done on different inputs in Kenya. And not so many have been done in India actually, but I'll say something of why I tend to believe these results. So they tend to be of the kind, what happens if children get better, more textbooks, better charts, better classrooms? And the answer is nothing. I think very systematically the answer is nothing. Nothing happens. There's one exception which I want to emphasize. And that's that textbooks, the only one place where giving people more textbooks has a benefit is if you take the top quartile of children, the top quartile of children benefit from getting textbooks. So textbooks are not useless, but they're useless for everybody except the top quartile. Okay. Now, I want to emphasize that's not to say that going to school doesn't matter. So if you go to there's no school in your neighborhood, you cannot learn. But once you got to a school, it doesn't seem to matter what's in the school. And that's not necessarily, should not be read, and I'll come back to that, saying that you should not give schools anything. But I'll tell you why that's I'll try to give you a story of why that's happening, but I'll come back to that in a bit.